Welcome back. If you are just joining us, you're right on time. Now let me dive straight to our topic. Globally, an estimated 736 million women, nearly 1 in 3, have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lives. In the past year alone, 1 in 8 women and girls aged 15 to 49 has faced intimate partner violence. Today, we are looking at gender-based violence, understanding the impact on survivors as we celebrate 30 years of advancing collective action to end violence against women and children. This year marks 25th anniversary of the United Nations General Assembly's designation of November 25 as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, in memory of Mirabal sisters who were brutally assassinated in 1960. And we are being joined by guests via Skype. Her name is Gloria Edukere. Gloria is communications professional with a deep commitment to advancing gender inclusion and economic development. Hello, Gloria.
For having me today on the call. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Well, it's good to have you. All right, you heard my background. I would like to ask first off, why is it important to talk or activate about gender-based violence, looking at the 16 days of activism?
Okay, if you could repeat that again, because I barely heard that. Thank you.
I asked why the importance of the celebration or the commemoration of the fight against gender-based violence. The importance.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So I would say that it is very important because gender-based violence is one of the prevailing issues that we are having currently in not just Nigeria, not just in Africa, but globally, right? And one of the reasons why we need to fight against gender-based violence is because it is a fundamental human right. And the minute that is being gone against, then you're not just going against women and girls, but also you're going against the fundamental human rights of individuals, right? And sometimes we try to see gender as, oh, it's just related to just women, but then gender has to do with men and women, right? And if you're not able to fight against some of these things or prevalent issues that are going on that are tied to gender-based violence, right, then the world can be a safe place for both of us to live. There's femicide issues, there's violence against some of these acts that are being repealed, right? So it's very important for us to actually voice out these issues, speak up. And there's an ongoing trend on TikTok now that says we observe, we don't judge, right? Mm-hmm. We speak up, we don't judge, right? So that it's very important to actually speak up and bring some of these issues to limelight so that people who are not first and foremost aware of it know that there's something like this going on. So yeah.
Okay, Mikki, before I allow you come in, you picked the words out of my mouth, because I was going to ask why are more emphasis more on the women than if the men? Because I have a statistic here that says it shows that 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence are male, equating to 751,000 men, that is 3.2%, and 1.38 million women, that is 5.7%. We have those numbers, but yet it is underreported.
Yes, so the thing is, women are more likely to face gender-based violence. They're more likely to have to be physically violated, to be emotionally violated, and even to be violated in the tech space, right? So there's also tech gender-based violence, if you want to think about it. But the margin between men and women is actually very large, right? For instance, men have been the core decision makers for a very long time, right? Men have been speaking up against issues of inequality and all of that. But now, women are stepping in to say, you can't keep speaking, keep speaking up on things that you do not relate with, right? These are things that I am personally going through. These are issues that personally concern me. These are the things that these are the ways I am being violated. You can't relate to that because you're not a woman, right? And there's been issues of, oh, women don't speak up. These are more private matters. You're not supposed to talk about it. There's also that part. But if we don't speak up, for how long are we going to continue with this? Let's not also forget about the fact that, oh, yes, men are also being abused. Men are also being violated in their own right. But women are more likely. That margin is there. They are more likely. Yeah.
All right. We are talking about how we can help survivors remain alive. In talking about this, I'd like to ask how do you think we can actually support women to speak up? Because it seems that although we have these numbers, but if you find out there's actually it's underreported. You see most times that women are not talking about it. If you go to police station, they say, "Oh, she came." Actually, they reported the case. However, it didn't proceed away from that. Aside from the reporting, and in terms of investigation, there's not much that is being done.
Okay, so I would say that regarding survivors, right?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you get my question, or do I have to come again?
Okay.
All right. I asked how we can help those victims survive in terms of people who are violated either by domestic abuse or perhaps rape or what have you. How do we help them survive, and how can we identify those who are victims, because in many cases it is usually underreported?
Okay, so I would say that in order to help people survive, right, it is very important to create systems, right? Create systems that not just enable them to speak up, but also create systems that empower them, that help them rebuild their lives, right? If you're creating community support centers for them, go ahead and do that, right? Because people are more likely, survivors are more likely to speak up more in places where they know that, oh, there's somebody who has also gone through a similar thing, or a similar situation that I have also gone through, right? So it is very, very important to ensure that they have a safe place, they have a secure space, and they have a place where they are not going to be judged. They will speak up, and then they know that, oh, I have support at the end of the day, right, to rebuild my life, because my life does not revolve around the narrative that concerns my situation, right? My life is beyond the issue that I have gone through. My life is beyond the situation that I have gone through. I also have a life after this. So creating systems that empower them and enable them to be individuals first and foremost, and also contribute to the society, is very important as well.
In your own opinion, do you think we have adequate systems in Nigeria that help to mitigate the menace?
I would say that we do to an extent, but we do not entirely, right, have a lot of people do not entirely have access to some of these centers, right? These centers exist, but the awareness around these centers do not also exist, right? For instance, the Policy Innovation Center, they have conferences, annual conferences for Gender Inclusion Summit, where they bring policymakers and convene change makers to talk about some of these issues. However, away from just that, there are also initiatives and organizations that are springing up to say, okay, it's time to actually fight gender-based violence and other form of gendered issues, right? But how many people are aware? So a lot of people don't know. It's not just the place of the individuals or private organizations and institutions to create awareness around it, but also the place of the government to create awareness around it. And if the government is going about creating policies and laws, bring people on board, yes, we have media houses and social media to broadcast some of these issues, but how about having more grassroots, more community focused initiatives and exercises that bring people within communities together to talk about these different issues, talk about the access that they don't have, and bring the access to the people. Sometimes, with if we want to talk about access, sometimes we're like, okay, there's a center that is somewhere in Abuja or somewhere in Lagos, is in the city, but these people are in the rural and local government areas, right? So how can you take the access from where it is to where they are? That's another thing.
Okay, Mikki, I think you may have a question or two.
Okay, Gloria, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Gloria?
Yes, please, I can.
Gloria, can you hear me?
Okay, I think she can hear you. Okay, why the
Can you hear
fix?
me now?
Yeah, she can hear you.
Yes,
Just
I
go
can
ahead
hear
with
you.
the question.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. My focus is actually on minors because, you know, in their situation, even where awareness has been created and they want to make the reports, they're under people. And those ones have this tendency to suppress because of maybe societal pressures or family pressures. So they say, oh, you know, now you've reported, they put pressure on the victims and say, oh, you know, withdraw it because, you know, that's your uncle and he's a big elder in the church. Or, you know, withdraw it because this man is very important and he's given us all this money and we're going to devote it to your education. But she herself would like to get out of it. And, you know, her, should I say, her guardians, her keepers, I was wondering, is there any way they could have some education channeled to the guardians of victims who seem to always want to go in suppression mode, which it boomerangs because at the end of the day becomes an enabler for
Yeah.
the perpetrator?
Okay, thank you so much. So I would say that regarding that, first and foremost, let's look at it from a two-way perspective, right? There's the guardian and then there's the minor, right?
Yes.
In schools, right, where these minors go to, there are schools, there are churches, there are mosques, and then there are also community-centered or family-centered projects or initiatives that they attend, right? The
Okay.
excursions and all of that. They have teachers in place, right? Is there a how about putting up self-help and counseling initiatives in schools and in churches where they can actually speak up to these people? Yes, if your guardian, for instance, or if their guardians, for instance, are suppressing the violence that they have experienced, right? How about having counselors that they can reach out to in other places? Because sometimes the violence that we actually the victims are or survivors are actually facing is stemming from their family members, is stemming from their immediate environment.
Yeah.
Right. So if there are self-help lines, more self-help centers that they can reach out to. The same way we are able to dial star 301 to recharge our phones. There should also be a self-help line like that so that you can dial and then immediately reach out to somebody, immediately have help, right? So the families are there oppressing and suppressing some of the minors as well. Caregivers are doing same thing. Some teachers are doing similar things in schools as well. So at that point, the minor doesn't even feel safe at home, doesn't feel safe in school, and the only place that this person could feel safe is just by um, having access to help, instant help, right? So what are the emergency situations or outlets, what are emergency outlets that can be put in place to ensure that these minors have help when they need it, at the instant when they need it? This is also something that we should look into. And it's not just a government thing looking into it. It's also it's also initiatives looking into it. It's also NGOs looking into it, and collectively looking into ways that we can salvage some of the situations and mitigate it.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, you know, I was going to ask her how we can actually best hold perpetrators into account. However, before we get there, I would like to perhaps elaborate on some of the forms or types of abuse one could maybe picture out there for someone that might be going through an abuse and feels like, oh, it's normal for me to go through this thing. Some people go through abuse from their partners in terms of emotions, and it feels it's normal. And some people go through domestic abuse in terms of beating and the rest, and they feel it's normal. My husband should beat me in a way. So some people go through this kind of abuse and do not know what they're into. So perhaps.
Okay, so I'm going to draw this from the very last question that was asked first and foremost about even educating minors, another thing, right? So, and then come to talk about the different forms of violence, right? And then maybe how it can be identified. So first and foremost, educating minors. You get to tell them in schools, in churches, the same way we are talking to them in churches about, what happened in the Bible or what the Bible teachings, and the same way we are talking to them in the mosque about the Quran and all of that, and talking to them in schools and teaching them physical and health education, agriculture, CRE, and the rest of that, or social activities. How about also teaching them about these forms of violence? Teach them about these things from a tender age so that they are aware. Because the thing that we do in Africa, especially in this part of the world, is that we believe that children are children. And the fascinating thing is children are not just children. They see, they hear, they know. And sometimes they even know these things more than you imagine or more than you actually think that they do, right? So that's one thing. Teach them about these different forms of violence. Or if somebody does this, this person is violating your rights. What are their fundamental human rights? They need to start from a young age to actually know. Now, speaking on the different forms of violence, we know that the most prevalent one is sexual violence, which can come in form of harassment and other forms. There's also physical violence where people are being domestically abused and violated. There's also verbal violence. There's also psychological violence, right? And for the most part, we tend to focus on the physical violence and tend to focus on sexual based violence, right? How can these things be identified? The very first thing is most times people just become socially avoidant, right? You don't see them in places where you would normally see them anymore. They don't get to, they just start withdrawing from activities that they normally wouldn't, right? And it's not just about adults, it's also about young people. You get to see them withdraw in classrooms as well, right? That's the very first thing. The second thing is they can't even speak up because they know that they'll be either ostracized, they'll be stigmatized, and they'll be judged, right? So if at the point where they start speaking up about these things and they know that they'll be judged, they wouldn't want to speak up, right? You see somebody that has been physically abused, and you assume that this person has been abused when you see the signs are there. This person is looking like, he or she has gone through a beating, has been abused one way or another, and you just assume, and you're like, you don't ask the person. Another thing is, how do you even go about asking? So there are many ways to actually have these conversations, from what form of violence is there, to how to even identify it, and how to even speak to these people, providing emotional support, psychosocial support, and the rest as well. So I don't know if that has answered your question, or you'd like to elaborate further on it.
All right, you've answered my question. Also, I would like to ask, holding perpetrators into account, what best approach would you advise? I know we have the VAB Act that seems to bring perpetrators to book, but like I said in my introduction, it is most times these cases or reports do not pass do not get to the extent of even investigation. So you don't see people held into account. I know this for certain because most times in our neighborhoods around us, we hear these cases, and at the end of the day, you ask, what has happened? They say, we've settled it amongst ourselves. And it seems as though like the victim might just have to look for a way to cope with it. And I feel like it's wrong. So what are the best approach you think we can use to bring these perpetrators to book and held accountable. Also looking into considering the culture, because the reason why sometimes they feel like they should resolve it amongst themselves is basically because they say, oh, it's my relation, we don't want to bring our dirty lily to the public.
Okay, so I read something recently, and there was a line that I picked out, and the person said women shouldn't talk about these things, right? And it just sometimes baffles me, like, why do we not need to talk about these things? And sometimes we wait for the government to actually do a lot of things. There are a lot of things we waited for the government to do, and eventually we end up finding alternative solutions to our problems as individuals and as collectives and as the society in general, right? So what are these things that we even need to do, right? Away from waiting on the government, away from waiting on policies and waiting on decisions and waiting on the government to implement some of these things, and at the end of the day going around to repeal it like the VAP Act, right? What do? Social media has made life entirely easier for us to be able to speak up and talk about these things. People are able to just pick up their phones and speak on the problems that exist. They are able to reach out to self-help lines, right, to talk about the issues that they are facing. They're able to research what organizations are available around them and reach out to these organizations to share their story. That's another thing. So while we are just waiting on the government to act, right, how about actually speaking up and reaching out to the people who can actually push the government into doing something about it, into amplifying even the situation that they're going through, right? Gone are the days where you just go through something and then you keep it to yourself because you feel like you don't have access to anybody before you be able to pay transport to go to somebody's house to talk to the person about it. Gone are those days. It's easier to escalate matters now. It's easier to escalate the issues that we're going through now. And I think it is very important for a lot of people to leverage the medium or the platform that they have at their disposal to be able to just talk about their minds, speak up, share whatever they're going through, and then find help and get solutions to their problems, whether temporarily or permanently. But just speak up, just escalate it.
All right. But I would also like to ask you this direct question. What advice would you give a lady's family who perhaps their child has been raped consistently by a family member, perhaps an uncle, and they are unclear on how to go about it? What advice would you give?
I'd say reach out to the initiatives and reach out to the organizations that can support in escalating these things. There are organizations that are available, there are initiatives that are available that will support you with the entire process, right? And even support you with the legal process around it, right? So reach out to these people and don't just keep it to yourselves. The family should reach out. The girl herself as well should reach out. If she's not able to, the people around her should help her, support her in reaching out, right, to these organizations. All you need to do is research which one is available to you, and then just speak up from there.
All right. Mikki, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about a situation whereby some people, try to project a situation of consent, whereas legally it's not even up to the age. We've had cases even reported in the press where young, junior secondary school students got involved with men who clearly enticed them with sums of money, telephones, and all those kind of things. And when the men were caught, they said, "Oh, she's my girlfriend. She accepted me as her boyfriend." How can a 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl, I've seen to have accepted sexually with a man? She's below the age of consent, so that shouldn't go for consent. But he kind of scaled out of it, claiming she was his girlfriend. And when the lady was, she said, "Yes, he's my man friend." So how do we get out of situations like that? Because they give a smoky image of consent, whereas it's quite illegal, and they are just as guilty as the other man who just found the girl and pushed her behind maybe water, be pushed her behind the back of the garden or in the farm land. They're just as guilty, but they give this impression that, well, after all, she accepted.
Yeah, so in that particular situation, which is something that is very common these days, right? You're at that point, you already know that, okay, these people are in a relationship together, and you know that this is not the age that this person is supposed to be in a relationship. We still believe that in Nigeria, being an adult is from the age of 18. When a situation where a child, because that's still a child, a teenager at the age of 13 and 15, 12, is in a relationship with an older person that is an adult, that's where the family members actually come in. I still believe in this. I still believe in community. I still believe in communal values, where people around us, where people in the environment are the ones that get to speak up for individuals who are not able to speak up themselves. I still believe a lot in that. And in situations like that, that's where the family members come in. That's where the relatives come in. That's where the teachers come in, because the teachers in school, right, that could actually call out, speak up regarding this person. Just speak up on behalf of this person, right? If you're not able to do that, then you actually don't want this person to get help. That's what it means. So I'll also still encourage self-help lines. I also still encourage that more awareness is being made regarding the initiatives and organizations that are available to support gender-based violence, right? And the government should still do it so much more about it. They're doing a lot, but they can still do more regarding gender-based violence and how to eliminate it, because 134 years to reach gender parity is quite a very long time. I would have had grandchildren and they maybe died by then.
Okay. Quite funny. All right. And don't you think I find it rather absurd that a victim is perhaps maybe stigmatized? You said it earlier that the reason we have these cases underreported is because of the fear from by the victim. So don't you think it's rather absurd? And how can we get to that place? Because you find out that questions like what was she wearing there? Why did she go there? Was it not at night? Questions like this are raised when a victim comes up to say, oh, I was raped, I was molested. And in terms of workplaces, they'll say things like, oh, it's because she has big eye, she's career driven, and she doesn't want to stay in a man's house. That's why she was sexually harassed. Things like this are said not just by men, but they're also said by women likewise. So where do we get to that place where we don't raise opinions, or minor talks as this to perhaps undermine the strength of the victim, whereby he or she can come out to voice out?
So two things. I'll start by saying that we listen, we don't judge. We really need to get to that place where we actually just listen and not judge other people based off our own values, our morals, and our high standards, right? We really need to get to that place where we don't judge people. And then the second part of it is really for these individuals, right? Women also are body shaming women. Women are abusing other women. Women are doing a lot. So it's a two-way thing where men are against women. Women are also against women. We hear things like women supporting women, but at the end of the day, some women are actually not supporting women, right? So sometimes you just really need to stand up for yourself. And for the fact where people would be like, oh, she was dressed this way, that's why that happened to her. This is how she is, that's why that happened to her. We have come to normalize some of these things as okay, they're everyday things, right? Oh, you shouldn't take it. It's not that deep. Don't take it so deep when somebody starts catcalling you or something, right? Don't take it so deep when somebody reaches out to you online and starts harassing you in the tech space, right? Online, right? So it is very important for us as a society and us as a community, because I still believe that we are a community, regardless of how we see it, is to actually support other people. Put yourself in that situation. If this person was my sister, if this were my brother, what would be the reaction? Right? What would be the response? So let us always try to put ourselves in the shoes of other people and come off our high horse sometimes, bring down our own high standards about or how we judge other people, how we see other people, to knowing that this thing could happen to anybody around us. It can happen to me, it can happen to you, it can happen to the next person beside you.
All right. Valid points there. So I'd like to ask, how important is it to involve boys and men in these discussions we are having about gender-based violence? Because
Okay.
if you look at your screen, there are pictures being displayed. When I Google searched as to violence perpetrated by women, it was few pictures came out. But when I Google search violence perpetrated by men, you could say a whole lot. It means they are actively involved in terms of gender-based violence, either domestic violence, physical violence, sexual violence, and harassment. So how do we involve men and boys in this discussion, starting from schools, families, the society at large, the workplaces?
So the very first thing is that a lot of patriarchal structures have positioned men as decision makers, right? And why don't we leverage that? Why don't we leverage the fact that men have always positioned themselves as they're the core decision makers in the household, they're the core decision makers when it comes to policies and all of that. Yes, women representation is important, women participation is important, but let us also leverage the other gender. Let us also leverage the men and the boys who are around us to also speak up. They play a pivotal role in inclusion as well. It is, the violence is not just a one-way thing. It is not just about women, but it's also about men as well, right? So while they're speaking up on violence against women, these men around or men who are also involved in some of these projects are speaking up on violence against men. So it is very important, it is very crucial to involve them as well, not just as decision makers, not just as advocates and activists, but also as the facilitators who are going about and raising awareness around these issues. They're sensitizing other people around these issues as well. It is very important. Men and boys play a pivotal, crucial role in raising awareness around gender-based violence.
All right, Mikki, will you have any intake?
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask, a situation whereby we have, well, let me even start with what we're doing now, which is the 16 days of activism. Where you are now, apart from the first day, has there been any other thing like today? Have you felt the pulse of the people? Is it impacting? Is it galvanizing? Is it increasing? Or is it one of those things?
So sometimes I like to say that I see a lot of activities on social media, but then the physical activities are not also heightened, right? Some people go on social media. It's okay to make posts on social media, raise awareness and all of that. But the same way that we during Women's Month, right, in March, right, the same way that we also have conferences, forums, summits, and webinars and all of this to talk about women inclusion, and this and that and that. How about also have some of these activities online, not just making posts, not just running campaigns and doing videos, but also having these events where people can come together, survivors can come together to talk about these things, right? I'm not feeling the momentum today just sitting down and going through going through pages online, right? I checked out for webinars or events that were around me that I could attend, and surprisingly so, I didn't find a lot, or if any at all, right? The only ones that I found were towards the end of the activism period, and they're just some things that are tied towards gender inclusion, but are not necessarily projecting topics around gender-based violence. So that's another thing that we can do. While we're trying to celebrate Women's Day, we're celebrating International Day of the Girl Child and all of that. This is also something that we should create activities around, plan around, create events around that people can attend to actually talk about these things. And it starts from the grassroots always. Create events from the grassroots. Community leaders can come together and create events in their communities, right? Do outreaches to different communities where you know that, okay, there are survivors there. Partner up with initiatives and create events that you can get to talk about these things, right? Because there's only so much that we can do, but we actually have to start doing something.
Start by doing something. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Another thing you've noticed that it all dovetails on December 10th to I think International Day of Human Rights, right? And I don't seem to see, that streamlining that, women's rights are human rights. It's as if they're, a little bit at par. So the emphasis now is on this gender-based violence, women's rights. So have you seen any, or is there, do you have any suggestions on what we can do so that we can merge them and have that sense of, women's rights are human rights too?
Yeah. So I would say that maybe just start the campaign now, right? And don't just, these campaigns sometimes are not just things that should be focused on a particular period of time. We wait until November 25th, until the 16 days of activism period before we start talking about it. Talk about it from January. Talk about it in February, in March, because gender-based violence is every single day. It's not just during a particular period. Yes, this is a period where we have heightened awareness around it, but after that now, we're moving into human rights, right? And we're moving into other things that we get to talk about, right? How about sometimes just having more encompassed structures and strategies around advocating for one particular thing, right? Talk about women's rights as human rights as well. So throughout this 16 days of activism, include the fact that, or spread awareness on the fact that women's rights are human rights. Yeah, so that's another way to see it, really.
All right, before we go, because we are far out of time, let me ask you this question. You spoke about the importance of social media in breaking the barriers of silence. If you go to most rural environments or areas, you find out that they lack perhaps the access to social media.
Yeah.
In some rural communities, you hardly find police station. Okay, so how do we improve access to perhaps to resources for victims?
So we have this thing where we
If you can hear me.
Oh yes, I can hear you.
All right, I asked how we can improve access of resources to victims in terms of speaking up.
Okay, I would say that we should strengthen our local networks, first and foremost, strengthen our local networks to establish more safe spaces, right? Establish more safe spaces in the communities, in the rural areas as well, right? And sometimes the resources that we are allocating to other things is even more than the resources that we are allocating to certain very sensitive topics and issues like this. Right, that's also another way of saying it. But yeah, I think that's one way to put it. Increasing this access, and we need to come to a point where we make access like 1, 2, 3, right? So if you're creating safe spaces for people, just like I mentioned, the helplines, right? Also create the same way we have some ATM stands and we have POS. Right now we have POS almost everywhere. Right, almost everywhere. Digital inclusion has now become a thing, and financial inclusion has become a thing. How about also making gender inclusion a thing as well, where they have people around them that they can go and have that are safe spaces that they can go and speak up, that they can go and interact with other people who are going through the very same things that they're going through, right? Where they can have access to facilitators, they have access to therapists, they have access to psychosocial support, emotional support, and any sort of empowerment that they can get
I don't know if
to
you can hear
rebuild
me.
their lives.
All right, Gloria. I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh yes, I can hear you now.
All right, your points are well taken. Thank you very much for being a part of this discussion. It was really, really, really enlightening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the call today.
All right. Do have yourself a blessed day.
All right.
All right, viewers, that's the much we can take today. One thing I take from Gloria's opinions is make access like 1, 2, 3, right? Mikki.
I say let's unite to end gender-based violence. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, until next time, I am Victoria Agbi Idoko.